everybody. In this video, we're going to talk about solving percent problems with equations. So when you're teaching your students how to solve percent problems, I do not recommend starting with this because this is a very computational method that doesn't build a lot of conceptual understanding. In contrast, the grid method with the 100 grids is very conceptual. So I would recommend starting with that one and then teaching them the proportions method and then moving to equations from there. Because the equations are basically just a shortcut way to calculate out the missing parts of percentage problems, but there's not really a lot of conceptual understanding in the equation method. So, the way that the equation method works is you're basically going to fill in the pieces of this equation with the information you know, and then figure out what the missing pieces are. And notice that this equation is very, very similar to the proportion equation we worked with in the last video, because the proportion equation was the part over the whole equals the percent over 100, and then you'd find the missing part of the fractions. And in this equation, we basically just multiplied both sides by the whole, so that you have that the part equals the percent over 100 times the whole. And usually we'll write this part as a decimal. So if we were trying to find what is 28% of 750, we would say question mark for what equals 28%, but we would write it as a decimal because 28 over 100 equals 28 hundredths as a decimal. And then you would multiply this by 750. And this can also be a great time to teach your students how the English word is correlates with an equal sign and the English word of means multiply. So that can be helpful to cover as well. So let's go through and solve some examples. So if we have a missing part problem like this, where 48% of the student body brings backpacks to school, and there are 500 students at the school, and we want to figure out how many of them bring backpacks, we can set this up and we can say, okay, we know the percentage, and we know that there's a total of 500 students, and we want to figure out what part of that total brings backpacks. So remember, the equation is part equals percent as a decimal, so maybe I'll actually use the letter D to represent this, times the whole. So the part is what I'm looking for, so I'm going to have question mark equals my percentage as a decimal, which is 0.48, times my whole, which is 500. And to find out what the question mark is, I just need to multiply 0.48 times 500, which tells me that the question mark equals 240. And so that tells me that 240 of the students bring backpacks. You can use a similar method if you're looking for a missing percent. So let's say that Ellie correctly answered 25 out of the 28 questions on her quiz, and we want to figure out her score as a percent. So to figure this out, we'll use the equation that the part equals the percent as a decimal times the whole. And when we fill in the information we know that she correctly answered 25. That's the part. We're looking for the percent, so I'm going to write a question mark in that decimal spot, times 28. So with this equation, we can use fact families to know that the question mark is going to equal 25 divided by 28. And you would have your students do this with long division, but I'll just go ahead and do it in my calculator. And when I do 25 divided by 28, I get this decimal 0.89285, and the decimal actually keeps going. So probably you'd actually want to solve an easier problem when you're introducing it to your students. But once you have a decimal, then you can convert it into a percentage, and you can say that the question mark equals 89.2%, or you could round it up to 3%, depending on how precise you want to be. And so that's how you would find a missing percent problem. And then if you're solving a missing whole problem, the process is very similar. You just take the information you know and plug it into the equation and find what you're missing. So again, the equation is the part equals the percent as a decimal times the whole. And so, if we have 60% of the balls in the gym are basketballs, and we want to know how many balls are in the gym if there's 45 basketballs, this 45 is describing the part because it's telling you how many basketballs you have, but not the total number of balls in the gym. That's what we're looking for. So the 45 is going to be the part. The decimal version of 60% is zero point 0.6. And next week, we'll talk more about why 60% can be rewritten as zero point 0.6 and how to teach that to your students. But I'm assuming you guys know how to convert percentages to decimals. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about the why in this case right now. So 60% written as a decimal is zero point 0.6, and then I multiply this by the whole, which is what I'm missing. And so again, fact families, if I'm missing something that I'm multiplying by, I can use division to find out what the question mark is, and the question mark will be 45 divided by zero point 0.6. And you can have your students do that division. So 45 divided by zero point 0.6 equals 75. And so that tells us that there are 75 balls in the gym altogether. And that's how you would find a missing whole problem. And just as a quick note, the order that we're learning things in this course does not necessarily correspond to the order that you'll teach this to your students in. Because you would want to talk about how to divide by decimals before you would solve percentage problems with equations, because otherwise your students would not be able to do something like this. But that's a topic that we're going to cover in week 5. So just keep in mind as we're going through this course that the order that we're learning the topics in is not necessarily the order that you're going to introduce the topics to your students in. So that's it for this video. If you guys have any questions, let me know, and I hope that you guys have a great day.